Kia ora e tamariki mai, and welcome back to The Word. It's great to see you all again. So, one of the things about the Bible is that it shows us the stories of people who were faithful to God. I think it does that so that we can learn from them about how we can be faithful to God in our own lives. Today's story is about a woman named Deborah. Deborah lived in a time when the job of a woman was to stay at home and look after her husband and her children. Deborah's story, though, is different because even though she was married, God chose her to lead the people of Israel. Yep, like the whole country. That was a pretty big deal back then. She would sit under a tree near Bethel, and the people would come to her and see her to have their arguments settled. Deborah was a prophet, so that means God spoke to her and she listened. She was a brave leader. When something needed to be done, even when it was hard or scary, she would bravely lead the people to follow God's instructions. And she was faithful to God. The Bible says that Deborah was responsible for leading the people of Israel back into a good relationship with Him. Now, Deborah was ruling in a hard time. For 20 years, her people, the people of Israel, had not been following God. They'd been in a massive fight with the Canaanites, the people who lived in the next country over, and they kept losing to them. The Bible says that the commander of the Canaanite army, his name was Sisera, had heaps of people fighting with him and also had like 900 iron chariots. This would have given him a massive advantage when he came to fight. So for 20 years, that's longer than you've been alive. The people lived in fear of what would happen next. They must have felt so helpless, but you know what? There was a solution. The people needed to turn back to God and ask Him for help. And with Deborah leading, that's exactly what they did. God spoke to Deborah and gave her some very clear instructions about what she needed to do next. He told her to call Barak and tell him, "Get together an army of 10,000. I need you to lead them to Mount Tabor and fight against Sisera and the Canaanite army." Now, this seemed like a crazy plan to Barak, but Deborah shared the rest of God's plan with him. "I will draw them into the Kishon River and you will win the battle." Barak was like, "Okay, I'll go, but only if you come with me." Deborah was like, "Okay, I'll come, but the honor of winning this battle will go to a woman instead of you." So they packed up and headed off to do what God had asked them to do. Barak called for the men to come and fight with him, and 10,000 men volunteered, just as Deborah had said. And they all marched to Mount Tabor, where they set up camp. Now, when Sisera heard this, he thought, "Now I've got them right where I want them." He sent his massive army with his 900 chariots, and they camped at the Kishon River, which was close to where Deborah and Barak were camped. Then Deborah said to Barak, "Now is the time for action. The Lord our God is going ahead of us. God has already given us the victory." So Barak did what Deborah had told him to do. He led his men into battle by the river. The Canaanite army went into a panic. They all turned and started running away, including their leader Sisera. That day, God's army won the battle because they listened to Deborah, and she had been faithful in doing what God had called her to do, even when it was hard. You know, God can accomplish amazing things through anyone who is faithful and willing to be led by Him. As a lifelong follower of Jesus, I wonder what amazing plans He has in store for you.